Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I am the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I'd like to welcome you to the Bare Bones Yoga Learn Yoga Challenge. I'm excited because today is the final video in this training series, although I did decide about halfway through that I'm going to do a bonus video about the benefits and some of the anatomy behind foam rolling, massage ball rolling, what's typically called myofascial release. So stay tuned for that one. I'll be making that one over the next couple of days. But today is the final video in the 8-video series. And if you've been following along since the beginning, you know that I've been breaking down key yoga poses from both the perspective of anatomy, alignment, and key actions. And I'm doing that really because I want to provide the understanding to students and teachers on all aspects, those 3 aspects specifically, of yoga, taking into consideration that if you're a student, you're probably learning along the way, and many people never invested in workshops or private sessions to really customize the practice to their own anatomy and understand it at more of the level of the anatomy rather than just kind of scratching the surface and picking things up as you go along. If you're a teacher and you've been watching these videos, and I've gotten some really cool comments on the videos from yoga teachers, just commenting about how helpful it is to understand what's happening underneath the skin, to understand the anatomy in an understandable way. And that really is what I try to do. The topic of anatomy is very complex, and then when you add in the added complexity of anatomy and movement, it can be really difficult to understand. And then on top of it, when as a yoga teacher, one of the things I like to do is add information in as you're teaching as to how your students can apply what they're doing in class to their life. So when you add that added requirement in, things can get pretty heady. And so my goal in all of what I do, whether it's these videos or my books or online courses or my anatomy manual, is to take this complicated subject and make it easily understandable, but not dumb it down. And that's really the key too. And as we've been going through these videos, I referred to the skeleton, I've brought up different key muscles that people need to understand, so that they can understand when they're doing these movements what's really happening underneath the skin, what's the benefit, what muscles are contracting, what muscles are lengthening, and things like that. So in today's video, which is video number 8, we're really looking at the tail end of the yoga practice. And so we're going to be doing pretty much everything on the floor here, which is why I'm starting out seated instead of standing. We're going to go over pigeon, seated forward fold, spinal twist, and final rest, or what's otherwise lovingly known as Shavasana. So I'm going to actually hold I have a little joke, but I'll hold it for the end. So let's first look at pigeon. So I have kind of a love-hate relationship with pigeon as a teacher, and the reason I have this struggle is because many times as I observe students in class, they really look at pigeon, or my perception of how they look at pigeon based on what I see, as an opportunity to check out. They look at it as a chance to completely relax, and by that I mean look like they're laying on their couch. They don't look at it as a pose, they don't look at it as something that requires the same attention to detail as the more active postures. And additionally, for some students, because of some imbalances in the body and that general lack of awareness and that approach to the pose as something that is relaxing, there tends to be just a sitting in the joints. So let me show you what I mean by that. You'll see sometimes, if you're a teacher, that when students come into pigeon, and I'm just going to go into it quickly and then I'll break it down, it looks something like this. Right? Or it could look something like this. So there's probably 10 other variations of what I'm trying to illustrate, but I think you get the general idea that it's very floppy, it's not supported, the person is just kind of sitting in their hips, sitting in their low back, their head could be hanging. It really isn't a pose at all. And for many people, you know, they really don't get what's happening in this pose. This is one of the postures that as a teacher, it's easy for you to say when you put students in the posture, if you have any questions, let me know. And I always try to say that, or often try to say that, because you'll sometimes see people kind of sheepishly raise their hand, and when you go over to them, inevitably the question is, what's supposed to be happening in this pose? Or what am I supposed to be feeling in this pose? So it's really evident to me over 15 years of teaching that people don't get pigeon from an anatomical standpoint. And they just look at it as, we're near the end, now I can relax, thank God. So let's break it down into its component parts. So I like to think of pigeon similar to Warrior One, in that you can see that this hip is in flexion, and this hip is an extension, okay? And so here we're contracting the psoas. We talked about that in earlier videos. And in this back leg, we're lengthening the psoas. That's the hip flexor that we talked about in a couple of postures. The other thing, though, that you may not get a sense of is this hip has a little bit of external rotation, just a bit, and this hip definitely is an internal rotation. The inner thigh of the back leg is spinning towards the back of the mat. So now when I come down to the ground, I get even a little bit more external rotation through this front hip. So now I'm contracting muscles like the piriformis. We talked about that in an earlier video. And the piriformis muscle sits back here on the area of the sacrum. And as you open this hip, that oftentimes can be a sensation that people notice or feel. But sometimes it's helpful to just start out by explaining that this hip is rolling open. This is your externally rotated hip. But also on this hip, what's happening is we're taking this flexion, and so again, we're shortening the psoas. But because we're shortening the psoas, we have to think about what's lengthening. And what's lengthening is the glute maximus. So we talked about the gluteus maximus in earlier videos as a really powerful hip extender. So here, right, I'm extending my hip of the back leg, so glute max is contracting. But here, I'm flexing my hip, so glute max is lengthening. So many times people will feel some pull, they'll describe it as just a tight sensation, and that can be that their glute max is a little bit tight, and here we're stretching it, here we're lengthening it. So one of the things that we want to do is get some of the weight back. This knee here is in a little bit of a vulnerable position, and that's because the knee joint easily moves in flexion and extension, but does move a little bit laterally and medially. It's got that kind of flexibility. And the way the joint is structured is it's not just a hinge joint. It does move the shin bone, the tibia and the fibula, but mainly the tibia, does move a little bit in and out. But it doesn't as easily do that. And so any kind of movement here, we want to just be a little careful about how we take that movement with respect to the joint structure and the ligaments and the tendons that support the knee. So this is why when we come into pigeon, we don't want to necessarily use the ground to leverage this. You see this? If I'm really focused on opening this hip, oh boy, a lot of pressure on the medial aspect of my knee, the interior aspect. So rather than locking this down and now putting all this pressure here, use the knee to set the leg down and then get the weight back. Rather than having a lot of the weight forward, get the weight back. This knee, just like Warrior One, should only be in front of the hip. Rather than taking it way out wide and starting to put some pressure on the low back around the SI joint. So setting that knee up right in front, coming down maybe just halfway, getting some of the weight back, centering the body towards the ground. If you want to put a block under the head, do that. Now you're supporting the neck rather than letting the head hang. This may be it, right? This is still very relaxing, but without all of that slump, all of that slop, okay? I'm really in the back body here, or the lower body, rather than shoved forward. So it's a pretty active shape as well, okay? Now, I'm just going to quickly address, for those folks that like to do it on the back, if it is too much pressure on the knee or uncomfortable to do it facing the floor, of course you can come onto the back. But this, again, is not a time to just kind of hang out, right? So I see all sorts of things when I teach. You know, I bet in most cases people don't even really understand what they're doing. So here we're doing the same thing. Opening this hip, keeping the feet active. So it's, again, an active shape. If you do choose to bring the hands through, to create a little bit of tension, a little bit of an isometric contraction, pressing this thigh forward, pulling the leg in. So you can see here, there's no flop here. It's not like this. It's not like I'm just hanging out. I'm not pulling the knee in. I'm not pulling this knee in. I have some really sustained contraction here. I'm just holding the leg in space, and I'm pulling in a little bit here, not too much, and just looking right up to the sky so my neck is nice and neutral. So those are some just quick tips about pigeon to bring a little more form to the shape rather than completely slopped towards the ground. The next more restorative pose is seated forward fold. So this is similar to standing fold, except we're on the ground. So I like to have the feet hip width apart. I like to flex the feet. And rather than keeping the legs stick straight, I like to bend the knees and suggest that people bend the knees a little bit. So this puts a little bit of slack in the hamstrings and doesn't have the hamstrings at their fullest length. So a little bit of softness in the knees. And then as you reach up and fold forward, if students decide to go for the feet and really try to have that be their goal, you'll notice a lot of times the back rounds. And it's the same thing we saw in one of the earlier videos when I was talking about forward fold. If there is some tightness through the hamstrings because of their origin on the sitting bones, it's going to pull you into that rounded back. So that's why with a little bit of bend, just think more about getting the chest to the thighs rather than getting the hands to the feet. So I can even just do this, just take the hands out of it, get the fold, and then lengthen maybe a little bit more. As soon as I start to round the back, I know I've gone too far. So that might be it, let's say, if that were my scenario. And then I could reach for the feet, or I could even just put some blocks alongside the legs and have that be the pose. Again, I'm not letting the head flop. I'm not sitting back in my pelvis, this posterior tilt. I'm getting up and forward. So this is anterior tilt to the pelvis. Got the sitting bones rooted. And I could work a little bit of a longer hold, and through that longer hold, I might get a little more length. But I'm never working with this idea, this mindset, which I also talked about earlier, to have the muscle be at its most lengthened state. Think about trying to do things to avoid pulling on the origin of the muscle there. So this might be fine. You can even set up a couple blocks and rest the head on them as well. So the next posture is spinal twist. I don't teach this too often. I find that this can be a little bit much for the lower back. But if you do like to end with a little twist, you could have the person, or as you're practicing, pull the knee into the chest and then twist over, right? And then turn the upper body over as well. Now, one of the things to notice is if you have a lot of lockdown in the pose and you're moving the leg, you'll start to feel some tightness and some pull on the sacrum. So let the whole lower body roll over as well, rather than locking down and then trying to move. And you can think about some of the tips I gave in twisting triangle with respect to people trying to keep the lower back completely flat while they're rotating through the spine. If I'm going to try to turn through my lumbar spine, I want to prevent strain on the SI joint back here. So I really want to have a little bit of a fluid movement there. So as I take the knee over, I want to let the twist happen and let the weight of the pelvis fall that way, rather than locking down and then trying to pull the leg over. You're going to feel some pull back there, and this is how over time these things can lead to some loosening of those ligaments around the SI joint, okay? And then we come to the last posture in the series, Shavasana. This is, of course, the resting pose. And I was going to say earlier, as I remember I read a joke one time, yoga is the only type of exercise where you get to end with a rest. And this is, of course, so important for us. It's a great opportunity to be in silence, to not be sleeping, but yet be relaxed. I have a really just huge challenge with students who get up and leave before Shavasana. I bet in many, many cases, these are students who just feel like this is the resting part, I don't need this. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an extra 3 to 4 minutes. I can't even imagine something you have to get to that is so important that you can't wait 4 minutes to restore your nervous system back to baseline. But again, this happens, and as teachers, we all have to kind of manage these things in our own way, in ways that are respectful to the student, but also respectful to the other students. So I always like to, if I see a student getting up early to leave, right before Shavasana starts, if I'm near to them, I do approach them and encourage them not to be squirting cleaner on their mat and making a big commotion, to just quietly take their stuff and go. If I'm not close to the student and I can't, kind of give that suggestion, I just kind of let them do their thing. That's really all you can do. Some teachers do like to make an announcement at the beginning of class. If you're going to be leaving early, please leave before Shavasana. I could go on and on and on about this particular topic, but let's just kind of look at the pose itself from the perspective of benefit to the student. So we're talking about an opportunity to bring the the metabolism from the perspective of heart rate and pulse rate, just bring everything back to baseline. It's also a wonderful way for the person to really start to, not so much actively think about what they've just done, but let the body kind of absorb. I always think of this process of kind of assimilating the information, the movements that you've done, and just letting the body kind of start to absorb that information. I know that sounds a little bit out there and probably isn't certainly the most clinical of explanations, but just that sense of bringing just the basics of heart rate and pulse rate back to regular rhythm can be really important, rather than just towards the tail end doing pigeon and then jumping up and leaving. Also, from the perspective of mind centering and focus and meditation, that aspect of just being in stillness without being asleep is very, very important. So we start to kind of help people build some comfort level with doing nothing. So having them come down, you can have people cover the eyes with something. I like something just really basic like this. Over time, I know some teachers are suggesting, and I've suggested it a couple times, if people are uncomfortable lying completely flat, having them put some blocks under the thighs can just give a little bit more arch to the lower back if that's more comfortable for them. If you want to do something a little bit more involved and you have the space to do it, you can have people go up against the wall and take their legs up the wall and take Shavasana like this. I don't like to encourage things like headstand or shoulder stand in Shavasana. I like people to get into a position where they can completely rest. I think that's most restorative for all systems of the body. So we've come to the end of the Bare Bones Yoga Challenge. Do stay tuned for the bonus video about myofascial release coming in the next day or two. I want to also reiterate that one of the best ways to get maximum impact of this challenge is to download a couple of my classes. The online classes are $10 a piece. You can get to them via the website, the online classes page. If you've downloaded the PDF, the link is right in there. And download one or two of those classes, take them at home, start to apply all of this to an actual class. The other thing, keep in mind, if you comment on the video, you'll be eligible to get my most latest book, Structure and Spirit, for free. I'm also offering this to viewers for $24.99 versus the Amazon price of $31.99. And I'm offering you my anatomy manual for $50 instead of $65. This 200-page manual has all the poses broken down from the perspective of primary action, key action, muscles in action, joints in action, modifications, contraindications, and speaking to mind and spirit. It also breaks down a lot of information around assisting, providing modifications, red flags to look for when teaching, anatomy from the perspective of bones, muscles, and joints, and a whole breakdown of things to look for in anatomical position as you practice. So this took me 3 years to write. Over many, many times that I taught anatomy as part of 200-hour teacher trainings, I wanted one resource where I could pull together all the information that I felt was critical for teachers to know. And so this is what it ended up being, a 200-page manual that lies flat, very easy to have it near your mat while you're practicing and putting some of these concepts into practice. So stay tuned for the bonus video in the next couple of days. I'm so glad to see some of the comments from viewers about thoughts and things that are coming up as you're going through these different videos, so please keep them coming. Any questions, send me an email, Karen@barebonesyoga.com. Visit the website also for free downloads and to watch some of my free webinars on the webinar page. So thank you so much for participating in the Bare Bones Yoga Learn Yoga Challenge. Visit the website, barebonesyoga.com. Send me an email with any questions or comments, and I'll see you at the next video. Namaste.